Greatness is subjective. In Magic the Gathering, there are a lot of greatest things we can point to. There are great top decks.
What is on top of the deck? What is on top of the deck? Oh, it's Lightning Helix! Oh my god!
Great tournament runs.
And we begin at the front table. There you see Mr. Louis Scott Vargas, the man from Channel Fireball, in pursuit of history. 16-0.
Greatest Pro Tour finals of all time.
Hello and welcome to the finals of 1999 Pro Tour Chicago. I'm Randy Bueller. I'm here with Brian Hacker, and we're really looking forward to this championship match between Bob Maher Jr. on the right hand of your screen and Brian Davis on the left.
Greatest of all time debates. Greatest decks of all time. Greatest format of all time. Greatest player without a Pro Tour top 8. Greatest player from a particular country. Greatest cards of all time. Greatness is often a measure not just of the skill on display or the awe it inspires, but of personal significance and historical relevance. Great to me likely means something very different to you, and different again to the next person we might ask in the comment section of this very video. At the Pro Tour, where the highest level Magic in the world gets played, greatness is often the norm. Plenty of great plays happen outside of the Pro Tour too.
He's gonna pass back.
Oh my god, if he taps out to... Oh! Wow! Patrick
Flamer Fire.
Oh my god! Unbelievable. Unbelievable. That is how you play a red deck.
Oh my god.
And that's the match. Unbelievable. Ross cannot believe what just happened to him.
And the list of plays that could be awarded the moniker of greatest play in Pro Tour history are so vast, we could probably never agree on which one actually deserved the title, let alone if we consider the entire history of competitive Magic outside of the Pro Tour and Worlds. But if you're looking to protect yourself against something other than your opponent's good cards and stylish plays, then today's video partner NordVPN is for you. Much like we sleeve up our cards or archive memories of Pro Tours past to protect them, these days it really pays to amp up your cybersecurity. For every bit of free public Wi-Fi you might end up using, there's a potential malicious actor looking to harvest your sensitive data. Encrypting your online traffic with a VPN like Nord is one of the best ways to stay safe online. And if you use my unique link, not only do you signal to Nord that creators like me are worth supporting, but you also get the best deal possible. Currently exclusive to creators, purchasing a 2-year plan gets you 4 bonus months on top of what you're already getting, so you can stay protected for the longest time and at the best value. And we know Magic players love value. Everyone also knows you can use NordVPN to access content from across the globe, but I've actually found it most helpful when buying gifts for my family members back in Australia. It lets me browse local websites online and see them the exact same way I'd see them at home. Whatever your needs may be, stay in the internet's version of split second whenever you browse with NordVPN. They even have a 30-day money-back guarantee starting from your date of purchase if you needed any more peace of mind about buying the fastest VPN in the multiverse. To stay protected online, use NordVPN by clicking on my personalized link below to get the best deal Nord has to offer only through your favorite creators, or go to nordvpn.com/hungryonplane to surf safely. That's nordvpn.com/hungryonplane. For me though, the greatest play in Pro Tour history is a moment that has been seared into my brain for almost 20 years. What unfolds is ultimately very simple. The play itself is arguably unremarkable. In fact, the entire passage of play leading to the moment in question happens over only 3 turns, with both players taking a relatively small number of game action. But to understand the gravity of this moment, the brilliance of the dance conducted here, we need to go back. We need to understand who these 2 players are at this point in time, and where they sit among Magic's best. We need to look at the decks they're playing and the history of the archetype they're both piloting. We need to look at what recent set has just come out leading up to this tournament, and talk about why that's significant not just for this Pro Tour, but for Magic as a whole. We need to talk about Magic's mental game, and what it means to exchange invisible pieces of information across the table. But most importantly, we need to talk about words on Magic cards, and how the tiniest, subtlest, seemingly inconsequential thing can mean the difference between a play that passes by with barely a whisper, and one that has shaken the foundation of how I felt and thought about Magic for most of my life. How one innocuous phrase took a pedestrian matchup into one of legend, comes into play tapped. It might take a while to get there, but this is the story of my favorite Pro Tour play of all time, and I also think it's the greatest.
All right, well, it looks like the semifinals are about ready to go. So we'll see you guys back in about 15-20 seconds. It's time for Antoine Ruel and Kenji Tsumura. Stay tuned, we'll be right back.
In 2005, 11 years before I moved there, and right at the time I was devouring every shred of Magic's Pro Tour coverage, Los Angeles hosted the last Pro Tour of the 2004-2005 season, an extended event almost exactly a year removed from Canales' affinity-fueled beatdown in Columbus. Extended has just undergone a rotation, seeing Tempest, Urza, and Masked Block all leave the format, alongside 6th edition, and with it the laundry list of former Legacy staples that inhabited the last event. Once Championship Sunday rolls around, a slew of Pro Tour mainstays fill most of the seats, with some newcomers finding their way into the final day of play, all vying for the hardware and the lion's share of the prize money. The players we have to concern ourselves with, though, are two of the most decorated of the era, at least in terms of number of Pro Tour top 8s. But despite all that success, between the two of them, they have been unable to grasp one of Magic's most acclaimed accolades, a title. On one side of the matchup is French maestro Antoine Ruel, the slightly older brother of another French Pro Tour mainstay and fellow Magic Hall of Famer Olivier. Antoine has a ton of experience on the Pro Tour, with this Sunday appearance marking his third Pro Tour top 8 in a pro career that began in 1999, with his first top 8 coming at Worlds 2001 in Toronto. His opponent also has 3 Pro Tour top 8s, but has had a meteoric rise through professional Magic, as his first top 8 came as recently as 2004. Another eventual Hall of Famer who in 2005 is not only vying for the title of Player of the Year, but is one of, if not the best player playing on tour. In fact, according to Antoine's brother, at this point in time, he is the current best player in the world. Japanese superstar and my personal favorite player of all time, the one and only Kenji Tsumura. Kenji is the next in a long line of early 2000s Japanese Magic players absolutely crushing the competitive Magic circuit. Since 2001 in Tokyo, where Tsuyoshi Fujita became the first Japanese player to ever make a top 8, to Japan's first Pro Tour win in 2004, courtesy of Masashiro Kuroda, Japan has produced a seemingly endless supply of incredible Magic players. Kenji is one of many talented youngsters alongside names like Tomoharu Saito and Masashi Ueso, and at this point in Magic history, he seems to be almost unstoppable. Calculating, thoughtful, and one of the most technical proficient Magic players I've ever seen play. Kenji is one of the pairings you least want when playing on tour in 2005. Like many players, he apparently modeled his play off of the great Kaibude, and given how sharp and aware of any given game state he usually is, that checks out. Easily, the two most experienced players still left standing in LA are set to square off in the semifinals, and funnily enough, they're playing the same deck. Quite different decks at the end of the day, but the same archetype, named after its signature creature, the one and only Psychotog. Nicknamed Dr. Teeth by the community for his wicked smile and some resemblance to the Muppets character of the same name, Tog is part of a cycle of Atogs, a creature type that dates all the way back to antiquities with the original Atog. Across the 5 colors of Magic, all the Atogs do roughly the same thing in that they usually trade one resource, usually discarding cards or sacrificing permanents, in order to make themselves bigger. The original Atog 8 artifacts, Orotog 8 enchantments, and Psychotog eats cards. Psychotog is already a well-established archetype by this point in Magic's history. In Standard, it won the 2001 World Championship in the hands of Brazilian Carlos Romão, and it's been a mainstay of Extended one way or the other since then, with 28 players bringing the creature in their deck in some form at this particular tournament. There's a reason we just had a modern Pro Tour where one of the most played cards was Psychic Rock, a very on-the-nose nod to the great Togfather himself. On the surface, Psychotog might just look like a reasonably costed 3-drop that you can trade your cards to pump up, but the way Tog typically played out made it one of Blue-Black's greatest finishes. It was almost laughably easy to pump up Psychotog to lethal levels, with the card often swinging in for 20 plus damage in the endgame, and that has everything to do with how synergistic its 2 activated abilities are. At a base level, you already got +1/+1 just for discarding a card, but it was the exiling of cards in your graveyard that dialed this creature's stat lines up to game-ending levels. Consider that discarding a card to the Tog is halfway to activating its second ability, and each card you discarded was not +1 power, but actually +1.5 power. At a baseline, this made 2 cards fed into a Psychotog as good as a giant growth, 2 for the first 2 discards, and 1 for eating those cards afterward. And you didn't even have to discard cards if you needed to hold onto them. You could just eat whatever was left over in your graveyard from playing spells without discarding any counter or removal spells you might need. This isn't even including commonly played Psychotog cards like Circular Logic or Ghastly Demise, which both benefited from your ability to quickly put cards in your graveyard, with the former being a real beating because discarding it not only fed your Tog, but gave you access to Logic's Madness discount. Fact or Fiction was the real all-star in these decks though. Already an absurdly good card advantage card by itself, it was so powerful in its time in Standard and Extended that it spawned the unwieldy acronym EOTFOFYL, which was short for End of Turn, Fact or Fiction, you lose. Given the amount of cards you got from this card, not even thinking about how the minigame it forces your opponents to play puts the impetus on them not screwing up instead of you, it was a reasonably accurate in-joke, even if this abridged phrasing was a bit of a mouthful. Its specific synergy with Psychotog though is made even more apparent with just a little math. Given that your opponent has to make 2 piles of cards between the 5 revealed, you are guaranteed to get at least 3 cards if you simply take the biggest pile, because the smallest the 2 piles can be are 3 and 2 cards apiece. Fact or Fiction also put the other cards in your graveyard, which is good news for Dr. Teeth, as after discarding 3 cards and then exiling the 6 new cards in your graveyard, because the fact itself also went to the bin, and casting this one draw spell was guaranteed to pump your Tog by +6/+6 with nothing else going on. Between these 2 cards and a pile of efficient draw, removal, and counter spells, the blue-black Psychotog core made for a deadly control shell to let you play all of the best available spells to contain your opponent, while also giving you a creature to let you capitalize on your attrition game plan by KOing your opponent in a single swing. Like I mentioned, both players in this semifinal are playing Psychotog, but the specifics and even colors of their decks vary wildly. Antoine, for the most part, is playing what the coverage dubs an old school take on Psychotog, blue-black only, with a streamlined series of counters, draw spells, and removal that echoed the dominant standard decks of times gone by. A deck that simply wants to trade its spells for yours until it goes over the top of you with a card advantage spell so juicy that it not only puts you ahead on cards forever, but gives fuel to your inevitable win condition. Kenji's deck, on the other hand, is very, very different. About the only things they have in common are the 4 copies of Vanilla Counterspell and the card Psychotog. While Kenji is trying to do a similar thing to Antoine, control the game before finishing his opponent off with a big Tog, compared to Ruel's old school sensibilities, he's playing all of the new high-tech cards instead. He has Cunning Wish for finding sideboarded silver bullets, Gifts Ungiven as a card advantage engine of choice, and even an entire extra color to get access to cards like Pernicious Deed and Putrefy. But the card everyone is talking about before the event, he also happens to be playing, and it's unbelievably good in these Psychotog decks. Before I explain what card Kenji is playing though that is taking the event by storm, we have to zoom out for a second and figure out what set is even the newest one in Magic at the time. It's a beloved set, in many ways the direct successor to one of the most loved blocks of all time, arguably done right with all of the learnings and experience that Wizards has gained since 2000 and the release of Invasion Block. But I do not say this lightly. The most current set in October of 2005, when Pro Tour Los Angeles is taking place, is one of the most impactful sets in Magic history. In fact, it arguably, very literally, defines modern Magic today. Ravnica City of Guilds, a multicolor haven that changed how we talked about color combinations forever. Blue-white became Azorius, green-black became Golgari, and the game's most classic aggro colors red-white became Boros. Magic wasn't just the color wheel anymore. We now had 10 distinct guilds that represented all the different combinations and preferences that the different pieces of the color pie brought to bear. The set, of course, also came with new mechanics and new keywords, and at PTLA, no guild was getting more attention in Extended than the Golgari, all thanks to Dredge. Dredge you probably know as the shorthand for numerous graveyard-centric strategies that have at one point been boogeyman of different Magic formats. Dredge, representing the Golgari's ideas of death, decay, rebirth, and recursion, were cards that functioned from graveyards. Not only did dredging cards up from your graveyard mean you could consistently recur them, but they also filled your graveyard as well. The power of the keyword was already apparent despite the set only being out for less than a month leading up to the event, with an elemental-laden, Patriarch's bidding-powered version of a graveyard dredge deck trying to utilize the keyword's ability to rapidly mill your library to recur a game-winning board of beasties. It was the fair plan, though, that really took PTLA by storm, with the standout dredge card of the weekend not being Golgari Grave Troll, but Life from the Loam. On the surface, Loam looks like a somewhat mid-deal, trading a single card for 3, which sounds good, but is made a lot less appealing when all you're getting back is lands. Beneath that though is the powerful card advantage engine we know Loam as now, made even better when the lands you can recur are things like Lonely Sandbar, Cephalid Colosseum, and Fetch lands. Loam was perceived to be so powerful that it spawned an almost entirely new archetype called Dredgetog, the same variant that's being piloted by Kenji Tsumura to the top of the Swiss. Loam not only gave control decks a tool that meant they would never miss their land drops once it was online, but it made growing a Psychotog to lethal levels a trivial task once your engine was online, giving you access to lands you were happy to throw away while milling your library at rates that was significantly faster than Fact or Fiction. Life from the Loam might have been green and cost 1 more mana, but with the utility lands available in Extended even in 2005, more often than not it looked closer to Ancestral Recall than Gift of Estates. But as good as Loam was, it was far from the most impactful card printed in Ravnica. In fairness though, nothing can come close to changing Magic the way these cards did. The top 10 best cards from Ravnica block all happen to be from the same cycle. In fact, they're even the same card type. their lands. Across the 3 sets of the original Ravnica block, Ravnica, Guildpact, and Dissension printed a set of dual lands Magic hadn't seen anything close to since Alpha. It's hard to qualify just how impactful shock lands are, but if we consider that fetches and shocks are one of the defining qualities of Modern, an entire massive Magic format, it's fair to say they absolutely redefined the game. This same quality of current Modern, having silky smooth mana with endless color possibilities, turns out to also be true for its precursor Extended. Even with enemy fetch lands not printed yet, having the Onslaught fetches paired with Ravnica Shocklands meant mana bases were so much better than they'd ever been before. Keep in mind that Extended has seen time with the original dual lands and the much worse Mirage fetch land cycle, and even that was nowhere near the power level of what Ravnica bought for 2005 Magic. Onslaught was released in 2002, and only 3 years later, Magic would change forever, in many ways starting with this very extended tournament. And believe me, the Shocklands had a massive impact on decks people chose to play at this event. Just look at the top 8. Antoine's quarterfinal opponent, Tsuyoshi Vegeta, is playing Boros deck Winds, a deck that leans fully into the power of breaking a fetch land to get a Sacred Foundry. A year earlier, Shuhei Nakamura was in the finals of the last extended Pro Tour, playing the red deck Winds list that Tsuyoshi also designed, and it looks even better now that you can cleanly play Grim Lavamancer and Savannah lands on turn 1 off of the same land. Not to mention Lightning Helix is a pretty good card from Ravnica for these aggro decks. Even the other 2 red decks in the top 8 that look significantly more red skewed than Vegeta's list are running Helix. It's just that good of a burn spell, particularly in anything resembling an aggro mirror, and they're able to do that for little cost to their mana because of Sacred Foundry. And it's not like the other lands aren't getting looked at. Ruel's Psychotog deck gets a straight land upgrade in Watery Grave, and Kenji's 3-color Dredgetog list is made possible thanks to the power of Loam with fetch lands, combined with the fact that both Watery Grave and Overgrown Tomb fit right into the colors his deck is in. By contrast, if we look at another top 8 control list, Ryuichi Arida's Septichant deck featuring a 3-color combination we now call Jeskai, his mana is made significantly worse, with neither of the blue duels in his wedge having been printed yet. While Shocklands alone aren't a reason to exclude an archetype from top 8 viability, there is a pretty understandable correlation between the decks left standing on the Sunday stage and whether or not they had access to the best mana in the format or not. That's how powerful shocks and fetches are. So we're close. We have almost everything we need to talk about this moment, but let's talk a bit about this matchup. Because even though it's a veritable mirror match, Kenji's tricked out control deck is a big underdog against Ruel's more streamlined throwback version. Put simply, while both players have these same threats, the eponymous Psychotog, and a similar suite of counterspells at their disposal, Ruel not only has a more streamlined build in general, but has access to significantly more card advantage spells. Kenji's deck, on the other hand, is all fueled by that fancy but ponderous Gifts plus Loam engine. So if Ruel is able to contest the copies of Gifts on the stack, then Tsumura is going to find it hard to gain ground in this matchup, even with the power of a card like Life from the Loam, which he only has a single copy of. Even if Kenji gets his engine going, his deck is powerful but very, very slow, which gives Antoine ample windows to find, protect, and profit with a Psychotog. Game 1 is pretty indicative of how bad things can be though, as early on the 2 exchange land drops, with them both losing their Ouroboros to the Kamigawa Legend rule after Kenji plays his, which actually gives Antoine a window to resolve a raw Psychotog when he plays his 3rd land. While Kenji does have both Force Spike and Mana Leak as possible answers to this on the stack, when he doesn't have either, he's left dealing with the creature now on the battlefield. This proves to be an extremely heads-up play from Antoine, who does know Kenji's decklist at this point in the tournament and knows that if he dodges some counter magic here, Kenji's removal answers are not nearly as efficient as his own. Kenji does have a last gasp to at least eat the cards in Antoine's graveyard and a card from his hand in order to pump the Tog up big enough to not perish, something that also made this creature shockingly good against all the red decks who ever thought about pointing a burn spell at it. But that is a mere speed bump on this Psychotog's eventual march into the red zone after Kenji's own Tog is met by an actually good removal spell in Smother. Under the imminent threat of Psychotog beatdown, where every point of damage you take inches you closer to being KO'd, Kenji tries for a Gifts which gets countered by a Circular Logic before untapping and playing his 2nd copy on his main phase, and fishing out some removal spells to try and stabilize the board. When Pernicious Deed is all Kenji can muster, not even having enough mana to pop the Tog until his next turn, Antoine flashes him the Fact or Fiction that's in his hand before revealing the top card of his library, showing Kenji the 4th land that lets him cast it, as some quick maths from Tsumura swiftly acknowledges that the Psychotog is about to get pumped up to omega lethal levels. So game 1 didn't go great, and it gets even worse after sideboarding. Antoine gets to bring in a bunch of heavy hitters like Moloku the Clouded Mirror, and Tsumura's Cunning Wish board, while sweet and flexible in his game 1s, something that assuredly helped him finish in the Swiss rounds as the 1st seed, is more of a liability now that he's in the top 8. Magic is a game of little details though, and it's worth rewinding just to point out a few other things that are happening in game Game 1. The Psychotog Ruel cast after he made his first land drop is a lot less reckless than it looks for such a valuable card, because Kenji's first land play in this game is Baron Moor, which only makes black mana, a price to pay for having lands that do cool things with Loam. Kenji's most played counterspell is, well, Counterspell. So Antoine knows that most of Kenji's counters are cut off when he doesn't have access to 2 blue. And at this point, I'm going to issue a spoiler alert, because it turns out the matchup data collected by both teams before this semifinal started was very good indeed, and Antoine is going to end up winning this semifinal in a sweep. In some ways, Antoine's deck feels like a rebellion against competitive Magic's natural evolution, against the idea that the newest tools and cards are always the best step forward. At a tournament where everyone is clamoring to find the best cards from the latest set and putting eggs into the life from the lone basket, Antoine is kicking it old school and Punk Rock Psychotog looks like the best call for the Pro Tour. This next game though has nothing to do with the decks really, so much as it does with the players and everything else we've talked about leading up to this point. This game puts the magic in Magic. We're almost there.
Almost there.
Game 2 of Pro Tour Los Angeles 2005. Antoine Ruel vs Kenji Tsumura. In less than a minute and a half, Antoine is going to execute what I think is the greatest play in Pro Tour history, and here the details really matter. Let's start by going through the things that don't matter so much first. On the play, Kenji starts this game by playing land and Antoine responds in kind. After Kenji plays land go once more, Ruel finds a sideboarded Duress on top of his library and aims it at Tsumura, who mana leaks it. On his third turn, facing only a single untapped island, Kenji decides that the matchup probably isn't getting any better and the coast is clear to run out the biggest threat on both sides of the table. Psychotog. Similar to Ruel's early creature from Game 1, it creates a point of pressure that you can leverage to try and force your opponent into a bad spot if they don't have an immediate answer. So, what can Antoine have here? Well, he has Mental Note and Opt in his deck, but those aren't going to be all that useful here. In theory, he could cast Circular Logic, but only if he had a discard outlet to trigger its madness cost, and the only way that's happening is if he has a Psychotog in play. The only relevant card he could have here is Force Spike. Force Spike is a funny little counterspell. First printed in Legends, it's supposed to be a cheap way to keep early game threats under control for the blue decks. Force Spike has been around Magic for a while, but it's probably best exemplified in the classic Drogo control deck Bueller Blue, whose entire premise was taking the idea of having a smooth mana curve that the game's early red decks pioneered and flipping it on its head. Bueller Blue tried to answer the following question. If playing a spell each turn and using your mana efficiently is a generally good principle, what would happen if all your spells were counterspells? Force Spike being a card you could actually play on turn 1 to try and contest your opponent's low drops made it a valuable bridging tool for control decks. A way to keep the more aggressive decks honest while you set up for your draw spells and more expensive threats down the line. Both Psychotog decks are playing the card here, mostly as a nod to the aggro decks present in the format, but it's alright in a counter war from time to time. Its main problem in this matchup is that with the games going long and both players wanting to make land drops for the entire game, spending a whole card to tax your opponent 1 extra mana to resolve their spell often isn't that impactful. The trick with Force Spike really is to get in while you can. The whole purpose of the card as a counter is to trade early with another card so you can buy time to get to your biggest stuff. Every turn that goes by just tanks the value of spiking anything at all, let alone anything of significance. Unlike its future free counterpart, the absolute menace of Nemesis Days, there is a cost to holding up and putting Force Spike in your deck. Kenji knows all this now, and the reason he's comfortable running out the single best card in his deck is because Antoine doesn't have a Force Spike. At least, that's what Antoine is telling him. Again, details. Invisible bits of information are always being transmitted in a game of Magic. On turn 2, when Antoine played a Duress, Kenji mana leaked it into Antoine's single open blue, and Antoine just let it go, telegraphing to Kenji that he doesn't have the counterspell. But it's even deeper than that. Details matter, and the smallest one here might also be the most relevant. Just 4 words of text on these brand new shock lands everyone is playing. While these are the best dual lands since the first dual lands, they do have more downsides than their beta counterparts. They don't enter untapped for nothing. If you want them to come into play untapped, you have to pay 2 life, hence the nickname Shockland. A relatively small cost, but a cost nonetheless. But if you don't pay, those 4 little words make a world of difference. Comes into play tap, which is exactly what Antoine's Watery Grave does on his very first turn. He knows there's no reason to hold up a counterspell even on the draw, which is the best time to leave Spike mana up, because there's nothing he needs to interact with that early in the game. So he chooses to play his land and silently whisper another piece of information across the table. I don't have a 1 mana play. When he then declines to spike the mana leak the following turn, it says the same thing. I don't have a Force Spike. In just a few seconds of interaction, Antoine has given 2 separate tells that tell a pretty convincing narrative about what is and isn't in his hand. And Kenji, being the smart, technically proficient player that he is, knows what those subtleties communicate. In a deck matchup where he probably already feels like he needs to take risks to win, he runs out his single best card with no way to back it up, all because everything Antoine has done up until this point would say it's the right play. Antoine knew that nuance as well and transmitted every sliver of info he could to sell his line. All the prep, testing, decklist knowledge, skill, information, and honestly playing with lands that at the time are completely brand new all amount to this moment. It turns out that Antoine had it all along. He just made you think he did.
Be casting against them, so that could help.
Ruel goes for duress. It gets mana leaked and now a force spike? No, he's still slow rolling the force spike.
Yeah.
Oh, is he trying to force spike a Tog here?
It might be. If that's the case, if Kenji runs out a Tog here.
Oh, here it comes.
Oh, what a master!
Oh my goodness.
What a master!
That's insane.
Wow!
That was awesome.
From the first play, come into play, tap,
That was
watery grave.
spectacular.
After that moment, Kenji could not recover in Game 2, and it turns out Game 3, even with his Loam engine online, Kenji's nouveau Tog just didn't line up well against Ruel's old school Psychotog deck. Ruel would sweep Kenji's Loam powered Tog deck in the semis before basically doing the same thing in the finals, taking out Billy Moreno's Life from the Loam heavy Psychotog Madness hybrid in just as many games. An inspired deck choice that bucked all the trends of the tournament to just rely on proven shells, some counters, removal, and a little bit of acting fit for LA. It's a simple trick at the end of the day, but there's so much inside and outside of the game that went into engineering Antoine's force spike play, and while there are many greatest Pro Tour moments, this one's mine.
You know what would be a good bluff, which I think is what he did? You put down watery grave, tap, and have a force spike in your hand.
Thanks for watching, everyone. You just heard more than 5,000 words of yapping to hear me talk about how sweet this force spike was, but I promise I needed all of that context for it to make sense. I'm sure you'll have your opinions though, so let me know what you think the greatest Pro Tour play of all time is. If you like what we do here at Hungry on Plane and want to support the channel, liking and subscribing goes a long way. But if you're wanting for a way to give more directly to the channel, you can check out the Patreon and Coffee for ways to donate in exchange for things like a members-only Discord, extra content, and to see what's coming up in our video pipeline. If you want to learn more about the extended Pro Tour that happened just before this one, click on this video about a different French Magic player and our Affinity Robot Overlords.